Welcome back to some more interesting questions. Um, this one is a very interesting question because I think the possibilities of it could be, it could be very possible. Um, the question is, could there be a secret moon base? Um, I mean, if you're asking from, you know, a terrestrial point of view or a view from here from Earth, could human beings, could we have built a moon base? Okay. Um, the fact that, well, I wouldn't say the fact that, but it is said, it is proclaimed that we have been to the moon on more than one occasion, several occasions. We have gone to the moon. NASA has gone to the moon. There are a lot of people who would argue that and say that they don't believe that. I'm not saying either way or. I do say there are some odd things about the moon landing, that I think are odd. And I think there have been valid questions that have been asked about the moon landing itself and, the validity of it. I do find it odd that we have not been back. I mean, going on now, 50 years, since the last time we went to the moon. I find that odd. I think most people, that's probably one of the most valid arguments is we went there in a tin can, 50 years ago, and now they're saying, oh, we can't go back. I mean, our technology, craft-wise, just, space, ship-wise. I mean, we have fighter jets, and I even think they said that, a stealth bomber itself could literally go into space, with the hauling of the craft or whatever. They're saying that, I think the F-35 fighter, they're saying, can literally go into space. So, I mean, but we can't go, we're not going to the moon in these things. So, I mean, like I said, I'm not saying one way or the other, me in particular. But I'm saying I understand why people ask these questions. NASA itself said, I actually saw a video on this, came from a NASA scientist and said, well, we were worried about Russia, obtaining the information. So we actually lost the information. So we don't know how to go back to the moon. Well, technology, you're literally 1,000 to 2,000, 3, 4, 5,000 times more advanced technologically than you were 50 years ago. I mean, let's say you're even 100 times more advanced. Maybe 5,000 times more advanced. But I mean, microprocessing and stuff like that it's just two different worlds than it was, in the late 60s or the early 1970s. Let's just be honest about that. So, like I said, I don't know. Maybe they did go to the moon. I really don't know. If they didn't, it was a very elaborate hoax. And I mean, it was literally a hoax, not just on the American people, it was a hoax on humanity by far. So, I just wanted to get to this video. It comes from Unveiled. So I just kind of want to do some commentary on this because it's going to kind of go through what it's saying is about a secret base on the moon. So let me go ahead and let's get to this video.
In the 2020s, all eyes are firmly back on the moon. It's been 50 years since the last crewed lunar mission, due to budget cuts at NASA and a desire to focus on low Earth orbit. But finally, NASA is planning to build a more permanent outpost to enable further lunar exploration. Unless, of course, they've already done this all before. This is Unveiled, and today we're answering the extraordinary question, is there already a secret base on the moon? Do you need the big questions answered? Are you constantly...
Yeah, check out Unveiled. Check out their YouTube page. I think I've used content from them before. I've used another video, I'm pretty sure, of theirs before. So they have some pretty interesting content. But yeah, check them out. And the same for me. You like my commentary on this video, like, subscribe, and share with friends. I appreciate the support.
Constantly curious? Then why not subscribe to Unveiled for more? In November 2022, NASA launched Artemis 1, the beginning of the long-awaited Artemis program. Artemis 1 saw the launch of the uncrewed Orion spacecraft, developed initially for the Constellation program, a lunar return program that received attention in the 2000s before being canceled by the Obama administration. Artemis 1 was really just a test flight for Orion and NASA's new Space Launch System, a super heavy lift launch vehicle. Orion successfully went into orbit around the moon before returning to Earth and splashing down in the Pacific. In the coming years, the Artemis program will ramp up, with the ultimate goal of establishing a permanent human presence on the moon. Scheduled for 2024, Artemis 2 will involve a crewed lunar flyby in Orion, and Artemis 3 a crewed lunar landing in 2025. The mid-2020s will also hopefully see the launch of the Lunar Gateway, a space station that will serve as a communication hub and short-term habitation module in lunar orbit. The Gateway and Artemis are set to link up in 2027, when Artemis 4 docks with the station. Thereafter, the Gateway will be an outpost in orbit for astronauts to use to descend to the moon via a lunar lander. Ultimately, it's they who will build a base on the moon itself. Of course, they'll also need a way off the moon, back to the Gateway. Excitingly, it's also been suggested by NASA scientists that the Gateway could someday be an ideal stopping point on a far longer journey to Mars. The Lunar Gateway is a joint endeavor between NASA, the European Space Agency, the Canadian Space Agency, and Japan's space agency, JAXA. This ambitious lunar program is not, of course, the first lunar program we've ever had. If you were lucky enough to be alive at the time, you witnessed firsthand the biggest space success in history, the Apollo 11 moon landing in 1969, followed by many more moon landings. Apollo ended early, however, with Apollo 17 in 1972. It remains...
Excuse me. Like I said, early 1970s. So 1972, I guess, was the last Apollo mission to the moon, which oddly enough, like, I'm scratching my head right now, like, so that literally puts us at this point where we literally just have not been to the moon for over 50 years. I remember an incident when China was launching their space program, and they invited, I can't remember, I think it was Neil Armstrong at the time, and one of the Chinese scientists that was working in the project, I guess, like, insulted him. He became very upset and he wanted to leave. He's like, I want out of this country. The Chinese scientist, I guess, had said to him, I'm not saying you didn't go to the moon. I'm saying that if you did go to the moon, you didn't go there in the means that you said that you got there. Which is basically saying is the craft that the NASA claimed that the astronauts went in. The Chinese scientists, well, because there's radiation, past there's a certain belt. I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head right now, but there's a certain belt. Once you pass that you go past the Earth's magnetic field, there's just massive radiation in space. Because the sun is a nuclear generator, so the Chinese scientist was basically telling him, I'm not saying that you didn't go there. I'm just saying is how did you actually get there if you went? Because you didn't go by the means that you said that you went there in, because it's not physically possible. So I guess Neil Armstrong got pissed off and just basically was like, I want to get the hell out of this country. And he just stormed off and said, get me on the first flight out of here. So yeah, it was a very bizarre reaction, from him, considering the question. He didn't want to answer the question. So
It's the last time that humans landed on the moon. After the United States won the space race, the government massively cut funding to NASA, and it's had to make do with far less money ever since. It's not just Apollo that was given the red light by the US government, however. In 1959, a full decade before America's eventual space race victory, the US had another idea about what its lunar future might be: Project Horizon. Project Horizon was drafted and costed, with many ardent supporters, until President Eisenhower rejected the idea. It aims to establish a permanent US outpost on the moon staffed by 12 people. This is astonishing stuff, considering the current world record for the highest number of humans in space at any one time, set in December 2021, is 19. Project Horizon was initially slated to cost the US government $6 billion, the equivalent of $60 billion today, which interestingly still makes it considerably cheaper than Apollo ended up being. Apollo ran up a bill of over $250 billion.
Well, when you're trying to achieve that type of feat, the government's not going to spare any expense. We spend $60 billion on nothing in today's world. So, people may have been a lot more conservative back then, when it came to spending, because maybe they kind of feared their constituents and their opinions on how much money they're spending. But I even think, and even in that era, people probably would have been like, well, we're going to colonize the moon. And they probably just would have been like, well, yeah, you should spend money on that. I'm assuming.
When adjusted for inflation. But why was Eisenhower against Project Horizon? Why didn't he want to put Americans on the moon years before Kennedy pledged to do just that? Well, Project Horizon wasn't about furthering humankind's scientific development. Like much of the space race, Horizon was tied up inextricably with the nuclear arms race. And that lunar outpost wasn't for research at all. It was to man a giant nuclear missile site on the moon. The plan came from the US military rather than NASA. NASA had been established in 1958, the year before Project Horizon was proposed. It was the fact that NASA now had dominion over America's space programs that led Eisenhower to reject it. In hindsight, it's probably a good thing that Eisenhower made this choice, unless, of course, he did approve Horizon in secret. In 1967, the world's governments signed the famous Outer Space Treaty in an effort to prevent nuclear missiles ever being placed into outer space. They hoped to keep space a place for research and the betterment of our species. But in the intervening 8 years between Horizon being pitched and the treaty being ratified,
that didn't work out too well. Because there are nuclear weapons in space. Definitely. I'm sure China has them, Russia has them. I would say at least China, Russia, and the US have nuclear weapons stashed in space. They're there.
could the US have begun building on the moon in secret? Could it have continued building even despite the treaty? In much of the world, the United States has become quite notorious for violations of international law, as well as for refusing to sign or ratify laws and treaties with broad support. There are some people out.
Well, I mean, let's face facts. If we actually went to the moon in 1969, we landed on the moon, and we say we have not been back there since, they must have discovered something on the moon of value. And then they just said, oh, we're done here. Nothing to see here, people. Everyone go home. Back in according to that, 1972. So there must have been something of either value or great significance as to why they never went back. And they just kind of go, oh, well, we can't go. Well, yeah, we lost the technology. We can't go back. A lot of that doesn't make any sense. You know what I'm saying? So like I said, they must have found something of great value or great significance. And like I said, they're telling us that they never went back. It doesn't mean that they didn't. So, I mean, yeah, that's what you would do. Oh, no, there's nothing to see here. Just a bunch of rocks and dust and stuff. Yeah. And then they just kept sending secret missions, and calling and possibly building colonies on the moon. It's very possible. I mean, maybe that's why they said they never went back.
Out there who seem to believe that there is a top secret American base on the far side of the moon, out of sight and out of mind for the rest of us on Earth. On the far side of the moon, such a base would be invisible to Earth eyes. As the moon is tidally locked, we'd never be able to see it from our home planet's surface. The moon itself also blocks radio communications between Earth and its far side. This does pose a problem for lunar missions. When the China National Space Administration launched the Chang'e 4 mission to the moon's far side, it also had to launch Qiuqiao, a relay satellite that allowed the Yutu-2 rover to communicate with mission control back in China. Then again, this could also be a boon if you wanted to hide what you were doing on the moon, because there would be no way for any other country to find out about it aside from physically going there or sending a satellite to photograph it. Of course, since Chang'e 4's mission resulted in a successful soft landing, it's now perhaps very unlikely that a secret American base is there. If the China National Space Administration had noticed it, they wouldn't have much of a reason to keep it secret from the rest of the world. Similarly, if there was an American base up there, it's very possible that the Soviets would have found out about it too, and wouldn't have given up on going to the moon like they did in the 1960s. The Soviets had plenty of spies in place in United States science programs. For example, reporting back about the Manhattan Project during World War II, years before the US dropped nuclear bombs on the Japanese cities Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the USSR likely would have known about such a base if one existed.
Well, or China is aware, they know. Maybe they could be involved with the bases, because I mean, when it comes to governments, there's all kinds of misinformation. And I remember that Bill Baer guy. He was a CIA operative. He wrote the book Syriana, and he did that show Hunting Hitler. And he says, "Oh man," he was under the Clinton administration, and he goes, "Oh man, I spent so much time at the White House doing briefings and this and this and that." And he's all, if there's one thing I can tell you about government is they very rarely tell the truth. And he actually says this in the show, Hunting Hitler. And you got to stop and think about that. It's not that they rarely lie. No, it's that they rarely tell the truth. That's what he said. So there's a constant campaign of misinformation, because you have to have all this misinformation to throw off people. Like they just said, Russia had all kinds of spies in there. Now, China may even be involved in our lunar program, but China has to say, no, America is the enemy. How do you know that China is not baiting Russia right now? You don't know. You don't know because there's so much misinformation out there.
Existed. And they wouldn't have let something as significant as that stand when it would have been so risky for them. Unless, of course, the USSR giving up on the moon was an elaborate ploy, too. The Soviets were, for years, far ahead of the US in the space race. The first satellite, the first animals in space, the first human in space. All these milestones were reached first by the USSR. The Soviets even had numerous proposed moon bases like Zvezda and the Lunar Expeditionary Complex.
And that tells you something right there. The United States was getting their asses kicked in the space race. They put the first animals in space, the first human in space. They had the first satellite, Sputnik. The U.S. was just being made. Russia was making us look really bad, you know. And the bottom line is the moon landing had to happen. It had to happen because, like I said, the U.S. was getting its ass kicked in the space race. So something phenomenal, like once in a lifetime event, you know, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Something along those lines. The U.S. had to achieve that.
They only fell behind upon the death of the visionary rocket engineer Sergei Korolev. As such, while they've never put a person on the moon, they certainly had the technology to do so. As well as building rockets on par with America's, the Soviets had the first space station, Salyut, along with several others, until the collaborative ISS was launched. It's arguably harder to keep humans alive in space than it would be on the moon, because at least the moon has gravity and some protection from the sun in its craters. Since the technology has existed for years then, and both superpowers had lunar programs at one point, could they both have secret nuclear bases on the moon? Do you think such a thing could be possible? What's your verdict? If both the United States and Russia had military bases on the moon, it could provide a reason for both sides not to tell on the other. It would be mutually assured destruction in a more figurative sense, as they'd both be seen to be breaking international law. But again, it's very possible that the bases would have been spotted by the China National Space Administration by now, or that they will be in the near future. So watch this space, because that's why there could be a top-secret base already on the moon.
You know, excuse me. My opinion on this is, if there really was moon bases or colonies on the moon, that would not surprise me. I wouldn't be surprised. I'll just be honest with you. Honestly, if there were colonies and there were bases on Mars, I'm sorry, I wouldn't be surprised by it. And you know, you also have to think the misinformation too when it comes to the moon landings is they want to throw misinformation out there. Oh yeah, no, the U.S. lied. They lied about the moon landing. It didn't really happen because you're throwing someone off. As like I said, it ended abruptly. 1969 to 1972. Let's shut down the program. Oh, there's nothing to see here, folks. Everybody go about your business. We're shutting the program down. Well, why? Because maybe they were going to do more expensive things on the moon that they did not want the Soviets or other countries. I mean, primarily the Soviets at the time, because that was just their largest adversary was the Soviet Union. So I say this. I ended on this. If there are if there's colonies or bases or even extraterrestrials on the moon, wouldn't surprise me not one bit. Sorry, but that's my opinion. Same thing with Mars. There are human colonies and bases on Mars or alien bases. Not surprised. But oh, excuse me. Sorry. Very unexpected. But thank you for joining me on this video. You know, Hit the subscribe button. Give me a like if you like this video, and share it with friends. And check out Unveiled. Check out their content. This has been interesting questions. That's the peace sign. I give you one of my own. Peace.